Welcome back. We're picking up where we left off. Solomon is dead. The United Monarchy, which was built by David and Solomon over the course of 2 generations, is currently intact. And yet, it is going to collapse in roughly a day and a half. What emerges from this immediate fracture is a physical and political reality that defines the rest of the Hebrew Bible until the Babylonian exile. I mean, the kingdom physically divides into Israel in the north and Judah in the south.
Right, and that physical division is really the axis on which the rest of this history turns.
Yeah, we have a substantial amount of ground to cover with you today, so here is the agenda for this deep dive. We are going to proceed in 7 distinct movements. First, we will provide a narrative and historical overview, setting the scene of the schism itself. Second, we will offer a brief scholarly framing on the composition of the Book of Kings. Third, Theme 1, we will examine the specific mechanics and theology of the schism. Fourth, Theme 2 focuses on Jeroboam's cultic reorganization and the establishment of the golden calves.
A huge moment.
It really is.
Yeah.
Then fifth, Theme 3 will cover the prophetic narrative of 1 Kings 13. Sixth, Theme 4 will look at the dynastic instability of the north contrasted with Judah, culminating in the rise of Omri. And finally, we will close with a devotional section, shifting our lens to reflect on leadership through a Latter-day Saint perspective.
And, that structure allows us to move from the momentum of the historical events into the textual mechanics, and then finally into the theological weight of the narrative.
Exactly. So we begin with the narrative and historical overview. The year is roughly 930 BCE. Solomon dies, and his son Rehoboam succeeds him. Now, if you were looking at the immediate political surface, the transition appears orderly. There's no rival claimant to the throne from within the Davidic house.
Right, no civil war.
Right. There is no immediate civil war over the crown itself. But beneath that surface, the foundation of Solomon's kingdom is structurally compromised. It was built on an administrative system known as the Maz. This was a strict forced labor and conscription system. Solomon used Israelite labor to build his massive state projects, the fortified cities of Hazor, Megiddo, and Gezer, his sprawling palace complex, and, of course, the temple in Jerusalem.
Yeah, the Maz was essentially the engine of Solomon's golden age, but it required immense human capital. We were talking about tens of thousands of Israelites drafted out of their ancestral tribal lands, their Nahala, and forced to work in the Lebanese timber forests or the stone quarries for months at a time.
Which is brutal.
Completely. And the burden of that labor fell disproportionately on the northern tribes, so it created this deep, simmering economic and psychological resentment.
Right, and into this heavily burdened environment, an earlier figure re-enters the narrative, Jeroboam ben Nebat. Jeroboam is an Ephraimite, which places him squarely in the northern tribal coalition. Earlier in Solomon's reign, Jeroboam actually served as a labor supervisor over the house of Joseph.
So he was a functionary within the very system that was extracting labor from his own people.
Exactly. And while Solomon was still alive, Jeroboam experienced this unsolicited prophetic encounter. The prophet Ahijah the Shilonite met him on a road, took a brand new garment, tore it into 12 distinct pieces, and handed 10 of those pieces to Jeroboam.
It is such a profound physical sign act. Ahijah declares that Yahweh is tearing the kingdom out of the hand of Solomon. He cites Solomon's foreign wives and his establishment of high places for deities like Chemosh and Milcom. The 10 pieces represent the 10 northern tribes. And what is critical here is that the prophetic word arrives entirely independent of Jeroboam's own political ambition.
Right, he doesn't seek the prophet out.
No, not at all.
But word of this prophecy reaches Solomon, who predictably attempts to kill Jeroboam. So Jeroboam flees to Egypt, finding refuge in the court of Pharaoh Shechem. He remains there, waiting in exile, until he receives word of Solomon's death. Upon hearing that Rehoboam is to be crowned, Jeroboam returns. But the northern tribes, they don't travel to Jerusalem for the coronation. Instead, the assembly convenes at Shechem.
And that choice of Shechem is a very deliberate statement. It is ancient covenant ground. Shechem is associated with Abraham's early altars, with Jacob, and crucially, it is the site where Joshua gathered the tribes to renew their covenant after entering the land.
So it's heavily symbolic.
Absolutely. By requiring Rehoboam to travel north to Shechem, the northern elders are signaling that this coronation is a negotiation. It's not a rubber stamp.
So the elders of Israel, alongside Jeroboam, approach Rehoboam with a direct petition. They state that his father, Solomon, made their yoke heavy. They offer their continued loyalty and service on one specific condition, that Rehoboam lightened the severe labor and taxation requirements. Rehoboam asks for 3 days to consider the petition. He first consults the older men, the advisors who would serve Solomon.
And they advise him to yield. They state that if he acts as a servant to the people today and speaks good words to them, they will be his servants forever.
Right. Then Rehoboam turns to the young men, his peers, who'd grown up with him in the royal court. Their counsel is entirely different. They instruct him to project absolute dominance.
They essentially tell him to crush the dissent.
Exactly. They tell him to deliver this exact phrase to the people. My little finger shall be thicker than my father's loins. They advise him to double down, stating that where Solomon chastised them with whips, he will chastise them with scorpions.
Just incredibly provocative language.
So Rehoboam returns to the assembly after the 3 days and delivers this severe ultimatum. The response from the assembly is immediate and definitive. They cry out, "To your tents, O Israel, what portion have we in David?" The kingdom fractures.
And Rehoboam, perhaps failing to fully grasp the political reality of what has just happened, sends an official named Adoram to reassert authority. Now, Adoram is the chief officer over the forced labor conscription.
It is quite literally the worst possible choice. He sends the very man who represents the oppression they're rebelling against.
It's astonishingly tone-deaf.
Yeah. So the northern assembly stones Adoram to death. Seeing this, Rehoboam hurriedly mounts his chariot and flees to the safety of Jerusalem. The northern tribes then officially crown Jeroboam as their king, which fulfills Ahijah's prophecy.
That whole sequence of events brings us to our second movement. We're going to pivot from the narrative storytelling to the scholarly framing of how the Book of Kings was actually constructed.
Right, because to understand how we are receiving this history, we have to look at the Deuteronomistic framework. We are reading a text compiled and edited by historians working with very specific theological commitments.
Yeah, scholars Martin Nuth and Frank Moore Cross established the foundational understanding of the Deuteronomistic history. This is the framework that the books from Joshua through Kings share a unified theological perspective based heavily on the covenant theology found in the Book of Deuteronomy.
So as we enter the Book of Kings proper, the editorial structure becomes really visible. The text settles into this mechanical rhythm. We see regnal formulas applied to nearly every king.
Yes, the historian introduces a monarch by providing a synchronism with the reigning monarch in the opposing kingdom. They state, for instance, that a king of Judah began his reign in the 5th year of a specific king of Israel.
The text also provides the accession year, the total length of the reign, and, for the kings of Judah, frequently the name of the king's mother. Following this data, the historian pronounces a theological verdict. The king either did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord, or did that which was right.
Right, and these accounts almost universally close by pointing the reader to external sources. The text continually asks, are they not written in the Book of the Acts of Solomon, or the Book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel?
Which is fascinating because these citation formulas indicate that the Deuteronomistic historian had access to state archives. These lost administrative records likely contained military dispatch logs, building accounts, court annals. The historian is acting as a compiler, sifting through administrative records and extracting the details necessary to construct the theological argument.
Exactly.
And it's really worth pausing on the fact that we do not possess the Book of the Acts of Solomon or the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel. They are completely lost to history. Right. This reality demands epistemic humility from us as readers. Our primary historical and theological narrative for this period relies on an edited synthesis of ancient administrative documents that we cannot independently verify.
And that dependence on those lost sources also explains the uneven pacing of the text. I mean, the level of detail provided for any given king fluctuates wildly. A king who reigned for decades might receive only a few verses, while a king with a shorter reign might dominate multiple chapters.
Because the historian allocates narrative space based on two factors: the material available in the archives, and how effectively the king's reign illustrates the broader theological thesis regarding obedience to the Deuteronomic covenant.
Right. And central to that theological thesis is a concept that will follow us until the destruction of the northern kingdom in 722 BCE, the sin of Jeroboam.
The sin of Jeroboam.
Yes. This becomes the uncompromising standard by which every subsequent northern king is judged. The text repeatedly states that a king walked in the way of Jeroboam ben Nebat, and in his sin, which he made Israel to sin.
Whereas the southern kingdom of Judah is evaluated on a totally different standard. The kings of Judah are compared to David. The text looks at whether they maintain fidelity to the central sanctuary in Jerusalem and whether they remove the unauthorized high places. So the historian applies two distinct rubrics to the two kingdoms.
That's right.
With that compositional framework established, we move into the theme 1, the mechanics and theology of the schism itself. When we look at Rehoboam at Shechem, his rejection of the elders' petition reads like a simple case of youthful arrogance. But there is a broader ancient Near Eastern context that elevates his refusal from a mere political miscalculation to a systemic failure.
Yeah, it connects to established accession patterns in the ancient world. When a new king ascended the throne in the ancient Near East, there was a widespread expectation that he would issue a formal decree of release. In Mesopotamian context, this was known as an Andararam or Meshuram edict.
This was a systemic reset. The new monarch would remit certain debts, free individuals who had been forced into debt slavery, and relieve burdensome conscripted labor requirements. So when you understand this context, the elders at Shechem were not proposing a radical restructuring of the state. They were asking Rehoboam to perform a standard ceremonial function.
Exactly. It was the established mechanism for a new king to secure the loyalty of his subjects early in his reign.
So Rehoboam's failure to grant this release is a refusal to participate in the expected norms of ancient kingship. He breaks the unwritten social contract of the ancient Near East. And yet, the Deuteronomistic historian introduces a theological statement right in the middle of this political event. 1 Kings 12.15 states explicitly, "The cause was from the Lord, that he might perform his saying, which the Lord spake by Ahijah the Shilonite unto Jeroboam."
That verse is crucial because it requires us to consider how the text handles the relationship between divine determinism and human action. The narrative presents Rehoboam's decision and Yahweh's predetermined plan as simultaneous realities. The author makes no attempt to apologize for or reconcile the philosophical tension between human agency and divine will.
We observe this same theological posture earlier in the Hebrew Bible. The hardening of Pharaoh's heart in the book of Exodus, or the demise of Eli's sons in 1 Samuel 2, they operate on a very similar logic.
Yeah, the Deuteronomist sees the unfolding of political history as the inevitable materialization of the prophetic word. The text is entirely comfortable stating that a human being made a catastrophic choice, precisely because God had already decreed the outcome.
It is necessary here to distinguish the text's retrospective theological explanation from the likely historical reality. Historically, the schism was almost certainly the result of deep, enduring economic and tribal tensions between the North and South. The united monarchy under David and Solomon was a fragile coalition to begin with.
Very fresh.
And the economic extraction of the mass system exacerbated older tribal fault lines. The historian views these political and economic causes and interprets them retrospectively as the mechanism through which Ahijah's prophecy was fulfilled.
And, the presence of the mass system also connects the schism to the anti-monarchic strand running through the Deuteronomistic history. When the Israelites first demanded a king in 1 Samuel 8, the prophet Samuel warned them that a king would eventually conscript their sons, take their fields, and subject them to heavy taxation.
And the figure of Adoram serves as the embodiment of that warning. Adoram had been the labor conscription officer under David, he continued under Solomon, and he was still in office under Rehoboam. When the people stone him to death, they are violently rejecting the fulfillment of Samuel's warning. The structural echoes of the Exodus narrative are really prominent here.
The parallels are substantial. You have an Israelite population groaning under the heavy yoke of forced labor, tasked with building store cities for a sovereign. You have a leader, Jeroboam, who returns from exile in Egypt to confront the sovereign. The schism functions literally as a second Exodus. Only this time, the oppressive monarch is not a foreign pharaoh. It is a Davidic king in Jerusalem.
Wow, yeah. And the narrative also employs a recognized wisdom motif to emphasize Rehoboam's failure. The contrast between the counsel of the old men and the young men is a deliberate literary device. In ancient Near Eastern wisdom literature, age and experience are heavily correlated with measured counsel. By dismissing the old man in favor of his untested peers, Rehoboam is coded by the text as a fencer of folly long before the kingdom actually splits.
He inverts the established hierarchy of wisdom, and the consequence of that inversion leads directly to theme 2, the cult and politics of Jeroboam's golden calves. Once the political division is final, Jeroboam faces an existential administrative crisis.
And the crisis is geographic and religious. The temple, built by Solomon, remains in Jerusalem, which is now the capital of a rival kingdom. The requirements of the Deuteronomic law dictate that Israelites must travel to the central sanctuary for the major pilgrimage festivals. Jeroboam recognizes that if his population continues to travel into Judah to worship at the temple, their political loyalty will eventually revert to the Davidic throne.
Right, it's a very practical problem. To prevent this, Jeroboam initiates a calculated institutional separation. He establishes 2 new royal sanctuaries within his own borders. He places one in the far north, at Dan, and one in the south, near the border with Judah, at Bethel.
And these locations were not chosen at random. Both sites possess deep ancient pedigrees. Bethel was the site where the patriarch Jacob experienced his vision of the ladder and set up a sacred pillar, naming the place the House of God. Dan possessed a long-standing sanctuary tradition dating back to the period of the Judges, complete with a priesthood that claimed descent from Moses. So Jeroboam is anchoring his new religious institutions in ancient pre-Davidic traditions to legitimize them.
He also implements a critical shift in the religious calendar. The autumn pilgrimage festival, traditionally held in the 7th month in Judah, is moved by Jeroboam to the 8th month. The text notes he did this in the month which he had devised of his own heart. By desynchronizing the festival calendars, he completely disrupts the logistical and social rhythms that would have connected the northern Israelites to Jerusalem.
The most recognizable aspect of Jeroboam's cultic reorganization, though, is the iconography. He commissions the forging of 2 golden calves, placing one at Dan and one at Bethel. He declares to the people, "Behold thy gods, O Israel, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt."
And that wording is an intentional, nearly verbatim echo of Aaron's declaration regarding the golden calf in Exodus 32. The Deuteronomistic historian frames Jeroboam's actions as a direct replication of Israel's foundational act of idolatry in the wilderness. The text presents this as explicit apostasy.
However, there is a significant debate among historians of ancient Near Eastern religion regarding the original intent behind the calf iconography. Critical scholars argue that within the broader West Semitic religious context, a young bull was not necessarily intended to be worshipped as a deity itself.
No, in Ugaritic texts and broader Levantine iconography, the high god El, or the storm god Baal, is frequently depicted standing on or associated with a bull. The bull functions as a pedestal or a mount for the deity.
So when we view it from this perspective, Jeroboam was not necessarily introducing foreign gods. He was creating a visual pedestal for the invisible God of Israel, Yahweh. This would make the calves at Dan and Bethel structurally parallel to the cherubim in the Jerusalem temple. The cherubim are composite creatures that formed the throne for the invisible presence of Yahweh. Jeroboam may have been attempting to replicate that concept using regional iconography.
And if this historical reconstruction is accurate, then the Deuteronomist's portrayal of the calves as idols is a deliberate polemical critique. The Southern historian is taking a rival Northern tradition of Yahweh worship and rhetorically reducing it to the level of Egyptian idolatry to delegitimize it entirely.
We should look at the archaeological context here, too. Excavations at the site of Tel Dan have revealed a massive Iron Age II sanctuary complex, complete with a large altar platform and associated cultic rooms. This provides tangible confirmation of a major northern religious center operating during the period of the divided monarchy.
The site of Bethel, however, remains archaeologically contested. Despite multiple excavation efforts, archaeologists have not uncovered a definitive altar or sanctuary complex that can be securely dated to Jeroboam's reign. The material evidence at Dan is robust, while Bethel lacks that same definitive finding.
Bringing this into a Latter-day Saint context provides an additional interpretive synthesis. LDS scholar John Welsh has written extensively on ancient temple theology, emphasizing the strict requirements for authorized space and authorized priesthood in administering ordinances.
Viewed through this lens, the central issue with Jeroboam's sanctuaries is not solely the debate over whether the bulls were idols or pedestals. The core violation is the establishment of unauthorized altars and the appointment of non-Levitical priests.
Right. The Deuteronomic insistence on centralization is a theological claim about authority. It asserts that there is a divinely designated location for covenant renewal and sacrifice. Jeroboam's attempt to replicate those functions outside of authorized channels constitutes a fundamental breach, regardless of the iconography involved. This focus on authorized space sets the theological baseline for the ensuing conflicts between northern kings and prophets.
Which brings us nicely to theme 3, the prophetic narrative of 1 Kings 13. This chapter interrupts the political history to relate a very complex and morally difficult story about a prophet confronting the altar at Bethel.
Yeah, the narrative introduces an unnamed man of God who travels from Judah to Bethel. He arrives just as Jeroboam is standing by the altar to burn incense. The man of God cries out against the altar, delivering a highly specific prophecy. He declares that a child named Josiah will be born to the house of David, and that this future king will sacrifice the priests of the high places upon this very altar, burning human bones upon it to defile it.
And as a sign of the prophecy's validity, The altar miraculously splits apart and the ashes pour out. Jeroboam points at the prophet and orders his men to seize him, but instantly the king's hand withers and becomes paralyzed.
Which prompts Jeroboam to plead with the man of God to pray for him. The prophet entreats the Lord, and the king's hand is restored. Following this, Jeroboam invites the prophet to his home for a meal and a reward. But the man of God firmly refuses. He states that he has received a strict divine command not to eat bread or drink water in that place, and to return to Judah by a completely different route.
Right, and he departs exactly as instructed. But the narrative then introduces an old prophet residing in Bethel. This older prophet hears of the events, saddles his donkey, and pursues the man of God, finding him resting under an oak tree.
The old prophet invites the man of God to return and eat with him. The man of God declines, citing the divine command. But the old prophet lies. He claims that an angel spoke to him, countermanding the previous order and instructing him to bring the man of God back for a meal.
So the man of God believes the older prophet. He returns to Bethel, eats and drinks. While they are at the table, the word of the Lord truly comes to the old prophet, who pronounces judgment on the man of God for his disobedience. He says his body will not rest in the tomb of his fathers.
It's tragic. The man of God leaves Bethel, and on his journey home he is killed by a lion. Yet the scene is static. The lion does not consume the body, nor does it attack the donkey. The lion and the donkey just stand beside the corpse. The old prophet retrieves the body, mourns the man of God, and buries him in his own personal tomb, instructing his sons to eventually bury him in the same grave, confirming that the prophecy against the altar will surely come to pass.
The narrative is deeply unsettling. A prophet is fatally punished for trusting another prophet. The text offers no simple moral resolution. The old prophet, who perpetrated the deception, suffers no immediate consequence and instead serves as the custodian of the victim's remains.
This chapter is a focal point for understanding the composition of the Deuteronomistic history. The prophecy against the altar contains a massive anomaly. It specifically names King Josiah approximately 3 centuries before his birth.
Yeah, and when you cross-reference this with 2 Kings 23, which details King Josiah's sweeping religious reforms in the 7th century BCE, the text explicitly describes Josiah fulfilling this exact prophecy at Bethel. The historian notes that Josiah did these things according to the word of the Lord which the man of God proclaimed.
So critical scholars point to this specific naming of Josiah as a clear example of vaticinium's ex eventu, or prophecy after the fact. Within Frank Moore Cross's framework of 2 editions, the DTR1 and DTR2 models, this chapter is viewed as evidence of the Josianic editor working with earlier source material.
The theory posits that the historian took an older, circulating story about an unnamed prophet and an altar and reworked it, inserting Josiah's name to retroactively validate Josiah's later destruction of the northern shrines. By embedding this specific prediction at the inception of the northern cult, the text argues that Josiah's actions were foreordained.
But we should acknowledge transparently that many conservative and Latter-day Saint readers approach this text differently. They read the prediction of Josiah as genuine predictive prophecy, taking the text at face value. The narrative holds space for you to approach it from your chosen interpretive starting point, whether that relies on critical compositional models or a literal understanding of prophetic foresight.
Moving beyond the compositional mechanics, the story grapples with the severe difficulty of prophetic discernment. The man of God is placed in a very difficult situation. He must evaluate a new prophetic claim that directly contradicts his prior revelation.
Well, the broader Deuteronomic law code provides a test for prophecy in Deuteronomy 18. It states that if a prophet speaks in the name of the Lord and the predicted event does not occur, the word was not from God. However, that test is strictly retrospective. It requires waiting to see the outcome.
And that retrospective test is entirely useless to the man of God sitting under the oak tree. He cannot wait to see if the old prophet's words come true. He has to decide in the moment whether to accept the invitation to eat.
We can connect this dilemma to the instructions given in Doctrine and Covenants section 50, which addresses the early saints' anxieties regarding how to discern between competing spiritual manifestations. Section 50 outlines a process of sustained relational discernment. The man of God's failure in 1 Kings 13 is a failure of discernment under the pressure of social authority. He allowed the purported authority of the older prophet to override the clear instruction he had personally received without utilizing a mechanism for independent spiritual verification.
This narrative likely belongs to a specific ancient literary genre known as prophetic legenda. These were compact stories regarding holy men and miraculous signs that circulated orally. They were designed to provoke reflection on the nature of divine communication rather than simply record a straightforward historical event. The story serves as a warning about the fallibility of those who bear the prophetic office and the perilous nature of receiving and acting on the divine word.
We now move to theme 4, the dynastic instability of the north contrasted with the relative stability of Judah, culminating in the rise of King Omri. After Jeroboam dies, the political trajectory of the northern kingdom is defined by a rapid sequence of assassinations and dynastic wipes.
Jeroboam is succeeded by his son, Nadab. Nadab reigns for barely 2 years before he is assassinated by a man named Baasha during a military siege at the Philistine city of Gibbethon. Baasha does not merely take the throne, he systematically exterminates the entire surviving household of Jeroboam.
Brutal. And the text interprets this massacre as the fulfillment of Ahijah's earlier curse against Jeroboam's lineage. Baasha rules for 24 years and dies a natural death. He is then succeeded by his son Elah.
Elah's reign is even shorter than Nadab's. After 2 years, while Elah is intoxicated in the house of his steward, he is assassinated by Zimri, one of his own chariot commanders. Zimri then proceeds to exterminate the entire house of Baasha, fulfilling another prophetic curse delivered by a prophet named Jehu ben Hanani.
And Zimri's usurpation is brief, very brief. He holds the throne in the capital of Tirzah for exactly 7 days. When the Israelite army, which is again encamped at Gibbethon, hears of the coup, they proclaim their commanding general Omri as king. The army marches on Tirzah. Seeing that the city has fallen, Zimri retreats into the royal palace, sets it on fire, and perishes in the flames.
It is a period of intense chaos. We see 3 complete dynastic exterminations in the span of roughly 25 years. And even after Zimri's death, the succession is not secure. A brief civil war erupts between Omri and a rival faction led by a man named Tibni. The text resolves this conflict in a single terse verse. The people that followed Omri prevailed against the people that followed Tibni.
We must contrast this northern chaos with the situation in Judah over the same chronological period. Rehoboam is succeeded by his son Abijam, who is in turn succeeded by his son Asa. The Davidic line remains completely unbroken. There are no coups, no assassinations of the monarch, and no extermination of the royal house.
The Deuteronomist uses this structural contrast to advance a specific theological argument. The stability of Judah is presented as the direct result of the unconditional covenant Yahweh established with David in 2 Samuel 7. The Davidic house receives a structural guarantee of continuity. The northern kingship, lacking that unconditional promise, is portrayed as inherently unstable and subject to violent turnover.
Asa's reign in Judah provides a clear example of the text's theological priorities. Asa receives a positive evaluation, with the text stating he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. The text highlights his religious reforms. He removes the idols his predecessors had made, and he deposes his own grandmother, Makkah, from her position as queen mother.
He removes her because she had constructed an image dedicated to the worship of the goddess Asherah. Asa's willingness to prioritize religious reform over familial loyalty earns him significant praise from the historian, even though the text adds the standard caveat that the local high places were not completely removed.
We must note an external historical event during this period that helps ground the narrative. Early in Rehoboam's reign, the Egyptian pharaoh Shishak invades Judah. Shishak strips the treasures from the temple and the royal palace in Jerusalem.
This event is historically crucial because Shishak is firmly identified as the Egyptian pharaoh Shishak I. We possess an external corroborating document, a massive topographical relief commissioned by Shishak at the Karnak temple complex in Egypt. The relief lists dozens of cities and towns conquered during his Levantine campaign.
What is really instructive is how the external source complicates the biblical account. The biblical text focuses entirely on Shishak's actions against Judah and the Jerusalem temple. However, the Karnak relief indicates that Shishak campaigned extensively through the northern territory of Israel as well. The external evidence confirms the reality of the invasion while revealing the narrow, Judah-centric focus of the biblical historian.
And the chronological data provided during this period of dual monarchies presents technical challenges. When you attempt to align the synchronized reign lengths of the Israelite and Judahite kings, the numbers do not calculate smoothly, especially when checked against external fixed dates from later Assyrian records.
This discrepancy led mid-20th century scholar Edwin Teale to propose a complex reconstruction involving overlapping co-regencies and different systems for calculating regnal years between the North and South. Teale's work highlights the necessity of treating the textual chronology with care, recognizing it as an intricate system rather than a flawless ledger.
Which brings us back to Omri, who finally secures the northern throne after the civil war with Tibni. The textual treatment of Omri is a glaring irony in the Deuteronomistic history.
It's almost funny. Omri receives a mere 6 verses in the biblical text. The narrative notes that he purchased the hill of Samaria from a man named Shimmer, fortified it, and established it as his new capital city. The text then delivers a negative verdict, stating he did worse than all who were before him, and he dies. That is the entirety of his biblical footprint.
Yet, based on the external historical and archaeological record, Omri was undeniably one of the most powerful and consequential monarchs in the history of the Northern Kingdom.
The extra-biblical evidence is robust. For over a century after his death, official Assyrian state records referred to the Northern Kingdom as Bit-Humri, which translates to the House of Omri. This designation persisted long after Omri's dynasty had been violently overthrown. His geopolitical impact was significant enough that the Assyrians essentially named the nation after him.
Furthermore, we have the Mesha Stela, a monumental inscription commissioned by King Mesha of Moab in the 9th century BCE. In the stele, Mesha explicitly states that Omri, king of Israel, had oppressed Moab for many days, subjugating the territory and extracting tribute. Mesha recounts his eventual successful rebellion against Omri's descendants.
So we have a king who founded a major capital city, exerted dominance over neighboring states like Moab, and cast a geopolitical shadow long enough to define his nation in Assyrian archives for a century. And the biblical historian dismisses his reign in 6 verses.
The contrast perfectly illustrates the priorities of the Deuteronomistic author. The historian is constructing a theological argument, not a comprehensive political history. Omri's military and diplomatic achievements are irrelevant to the text's purpose. The historian minimizes Omri to rapidly advance the narrative toward his son Ahab, whose reign provides the arena for the conflict between Yahwism and Baalism.
Scholar Terry Givens provides a helpful framework for understanding how we receive this kind of historical confirmation. The evidence for Omri's historical weight is indirect. We learn about his military power through a victory monument erected by his Moabite enemy. We learn about his international standing through the bureaucratic records of the Assyrian Empire.
Right. The evidence requires triangulation. It demands interpretive labor. It does not present itself as simple, self-evident proof packaged within the scriptural text itself. We must engage with the broader historical landscape to understand the reality of the events the text is commenting upon.
We are now going to shift gears as we enter the outro of this deep dive. We are moving from the rigorous scholarly analysis of the text into a warmer, faithful reflection, utilizing the framework of the Come Follow Me curriculum. While much of the curriculum focuses on Elijah, there is a vital thread regarding the nature of leadership in 1 Kings 12 that merits our attention. We are going to look at Rehoboam as the ultimate negative case study for Christ-like leadership.
The curriculum makes a really beautiful connection between Rehoboam's actions at Shechem and the teachings of Christ in the Gospel of Matthew. In Matthew 20, the disciples are debating who among them will be the greatest. Christ instructs them that the rulers of the Gentiles exercise dominion and authority, but it shall not be so among them. He teaches that whoever will be chief among them must be a servant.
We can hold that teaching alongside the image of Rehoboam standing before the assembly. The elders of Israel presented Rehoboam with an opportunity to secure their loyalty through an act of service. They explicitly told him, "If thou wilt be a servant unto this people this day, then they will be thy servants forever." Rehoboam rejected the path of the servant in favor of performing strength through severity.
We find a sharper contrast in the Book of Mormon, specifically in the account of King Mosiah and his son King Benjamin. In Mosiah chapter 2, King Benjamin gathers his people and explicitly details his philosophy of leadership. He states that he has not sought gold or silver from them, nor has he suffered that they should be laden with taxes.
Benjamin says, "And even I, myself, have labored with mine own hands that I might serve you." He grounds his authority in the physical labor he has undertaken for the benefit of his people, explicitly to ensure they do not feel burdened by his reign.
Benjamin's statement reads as a direct refutation of the Rehoboam model of kingship. Benjamin acknowledges that he could have exercised the traditional prerogatives of a king, but he consciously chose not to. He rejects the temptation to extract power from his subjects, choosing instead to elevate them through his own service.
What is particularly instructive about Rehoboam's failure is how quiet and ordinary the moment of decision was. Rehoboam was not acting in a fit of sudden rage. He took 3 days to deliberate. He sought counsel from multiple sources. He weighed the options, and after careful consideration, he simply chose the advice that allowed him to project an image of power, rather than the advice that required him to exercise actual strength through concession and service.
The counsel of the young men appealed to his pride. It offered a facade of dominance, the threat of scorpions, which masked a weakness of character. Christ, conversely, models true strength by washing the feet of his disciples, utilizing the basin and the towel.
And the schism of the kingdom, the establishment of rival altars, and centuries of ensuing conflict all stem from that single, calculated refusal to lighten a burden.
It demonstrates the immense consequence of the advice we choose to internalize and act upon.
Which brings us to a final thought for you to consider. If Rehoboam's kingdom-splitting mistake was born of a simple desire to appear strong in an ordinary moment of counsel, how do you evaluate the hidden weight of the mundane advice you accept or reject in your own quiet moments of decision? Next time, Elijah, Carmel, and the still small voice.